Hello, it's Paul Hill from serveracademy.com, and this video is for one of my students, Harry. We had a coaching call last week, and I owed him an explanation on how to get started with Windows Server security or IT security. So I'm just going to explain to him and to everybody else who wants to watch this video how you can get started doing this. When it comes to Windows security, the easiest way to get started on this is just get used to the process of working with STIGs, or Security Technical Implementation Guides. Now, these are things that you can find on websites like stigviewer.com. If you click on the STIGs, you'll see a full list of all these security technical implementation guides. And really what these are a list of vulnerabilities for different technologies and how you can fix them. And this is used by the DoD and government to keep their computer networks secure. But this information is public. You can find all of it at stigviewer.com. So what we're going to be doing is using the Server Academy IT Labs. So if you have a Server Academy full access membership, you can click the Labs tab. And I'm going to be using the Active Directory Users and Computers Lab. If you click Launch Lab, you can click Start Lab down here. I already have it running, so it says Resume Lab. And once you do that, you'll have this screen, which has a domain controller with Active Directory already configured, and it has a Windows 10 computer that we can test with. Okay, so what we're going to do is go over some settings in the Windows 10 vulnerability or STIG list. So I'm going to stigviewer.com. I'm going to click STIGs, and I'm just going to search for Windows 10. So here's Windows 10 Mobile. We're going to go down for the Windows 10 operating system and click this box. Here we have a series of vulnerabilities. We have Cat 1, which are the most critical security findings. We have Cat 2s and then Cat 3s, right? This being the least impactful, medium impactful, and these are the most impactful. And you can download an entire sheet. Now, one thing to keep in mind with these lists is that this is just a full dump of all possible vulnerabilities. It doesn't mean that all of these vulnerabilities are existing on your computer or on your network systems. Generally, you would use some type of security vulnerability scanner like Nessus or ACAS or something similar like that. But we can still go through this list, and this is a great way to get familiar with things like group policy and just administrating Windows Server networks by going through this list and just becoming familiar with what you can do to make the security of your IT computers better. All right, so let's just go through the list. Here we have local volumes must be formatted using NTFS. This is not a specific group policy change, but it tells you, just so you guys get a basic idea of how this works, high severity, that means it's important, we care about it, right? So there's the description of what can happen if we don't fix it, and then the details how to actually check it. So generally you would go through some type of checklist and you'll say, okay, this is not a vulnerability. I know my system's using NTFS, and you would check that off, okay? And this is the fixed text. This is what we need to do in order to fix our system, right? So if we're not using NTFS, then we need to change that. Okay, and like I said, this is why this is a good learning tool. Maybe you're not familiar with NTFS or formatting volumes. This is a great opportunity for you to learn this kind of stuff, okay? So let's go ahead and I'll just go back, and let's find one we can configure through group policy. Okay, so let's try this one right here. Okay, so anonymous access to name pipes and shares must be restricted. Generally, when you read this, you're not going to know what it means, especially when it's the first time you're reading it. That's fine. We're going to go through the description, and if needed, we can Google and try to figure out more information about the vulnerability. But what we can do really quick, we're just going to scroll down here to the bottom of the fixed text, and it's to configure the policy value for computer configuration, and then it gives us a path, the actual setting, and then what we're going to configure to fix that setting. So I'm just going to walk you through how we might fix this specific setting inside of our Server Academy lab, so you can get experience with STIGs and Windows security and kind of understanding how to do this. So over here in the lab, first thing I'm going to do is go over to my domain controller, and I'm going to click on Tools, and we're going to open Group Policy Management. And I'm going to expand the forest, make this a little bigger so I can see what I'm working with here. And I'll expand domains. In this lab, we have a pretty standard base default Active Directory. So I'm actually going to create an organizational unit for our Windows 10 computer. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I want to create a GPO that's going to secure our Windows 10 computer, but I can't apply it to this computer's container. I need to create an organizational unit. So I'll just right click on the domain, say new, and I'm going to select organizational unit. And I'm going to call this Server Academy. This is just a standard naming convention I like to use. I'll leave that as protected from deletion, and then I'll right click again, and I'll say new organizational unit, and I'll call this computers. And in general, I would have several OUs. I might have one for computers, one for domain admins, etc. But we're just going to stop it here. We're only going to be using this computer's OU. So up here, I'll click on the computer's container, which this is not an OU. This is a container. There's a difference. We'll get into that later. I'm going to drag my computer, desktop, whatever the case is here. That is this computer right here that I can switch over to. I'm going to place this inside of the computer's organizational unit. So I'll say yes. Now, if I click that OU, I can now see that computer is in here. So any group policy objects that I apply to this organizational unit will now apply to this desktop. Okay. So back over here at group policy, I'm going to hit F5 to refresh. And now I have my Server Academy OU and my computer's OU. So let's create a group policy object in this domain and let's link it to this organizational unit. And we can just call this Windows 10 STIG. Click OK. And I'll right click and edit the GPO. I'm going to expand this and make this side pane a little bit larger so we can see what we're working with here. And I'll go back to STIG Viewer and just review this path. So computer configuration, Windows settings, security settings. So I'll go under policies, Windows settings, security settings. I'll go back here and just read some more local policies, security options. So we're going to local policies and security options. And now we're looking for network access, restrict anonymous access to named pipes and shares. And here it is, restrict anonymous access to named pipes and shares. Now I can right click and choose properties and we'll say define this setting and leave it at enabled. And if we look, we can just see that we need to specify it to enable. There's no actual value that we need to configure here, or there's nothing available. So we'll go ahead and click apply. Hit OK. And now I can close this group policy management window. And if I click on the GPO itself, I can click OK on this little pop-up and go under settings, and I'll be able to see that that setting is now configured. Okay, so here's the exact setting. Now, if I go to the Windows 10 computer, nothing's changed yet because it hasn't run group policy. So a big part of when you're running group policy or making group policy changes is to go to the client computer and tell it to update and then make sure that the settings are taking effect as you would expect. So I'm going to type in CMD down here and I'm going to run command prompt as an administrator. And I'll say yes when it prompts me. And now what I'm going to do is run gp update /force. This tells the computer, hey, go out to your domain controller and get the latest group policies so that we can get the policy that we just created. Now, by default, this happens every 90 minutes, but since we're going to go ahead and check and make sure our settings are applied, we want to do this now. All right, the computer policy was updated successfully and the user policy. Now we can click start and we can use another troubleshooting tool called RSOP, and we're going to say .msc. And this starts the resultant set of policy. So when I left click on this, it's going to go ahead and load the policies that are now applied to the computer. And I'm just going to look through this to make sure that that setting that we just configured is indeed taking effect on this computer. Okay, so our setup looks very similar to group policy. The only thing that's different is most of the time, you're only going to see settings that are actually configured by group policy. So whereas before in the group policy editor, we had a bunch of options here. We only have security settings, and then we have local policies and security options, right? And here we can see, if we scroll down, we have a bunch of undefined settings. And if I scroll down here, I can see that we have the Windows or network access, restrict anonymous access to named pipes and shares is enabled. And if I look under source GPO, if I expand this, we can see here that it is defined in my Windows 10 STIG. So now this vulnerability is now closed on my computer. So if I was running security scanning software, I would see that this is no longer an issue on our computer. Since we're just doing this through STIG Viewer, what we do is go through each of the list items like we just did, and then mark it as complete so that we are tracking and we know that stuff is complete. And that's one way you can handle things if you don't have access to a vulnerability scanner. Okay, so that's all we got to cover in this video. I will see you in the next one.